So yeah, hi, welcome to the Cloud Automation Office Hours. My name is Thorsten Höger. I help tech leads to automate their cloud infrastructure, and I'm really looking forward to answer all your questions about AWS and cloud automation you might have. Feel free to comment in the chat whenever you have something you want to know. So why do we do cloud automation? So I several times said that the cloud without automation is just a very expensive data center. So I think that's my main motivation to automate everything to make sure that you really can use the benefits of the cloud. Because if you do everything manually, it just doesn't work. So looking if something is going on. Doesn't look like it. So I see we have some viewers, so maybe just say hi in the chat and we can see what topics might be interesting to you. Yeah, so we got the first question in the chat. So how good are the native tools to creating these automations? And I think it really depends on what automations exactly you want to do. So application level automations, it depends. For infrastructure automation, they are really cool. So basically your whole infrastructure automation itself can be done using CloudFormation and CDK, which is my preferred tool to do all these things. Operations automation can be done using step functions, using all the events in CloudWatch. So the tooling that is there is really, really good. There's always room for improvement. So you have specialized needs where a different tool might be a better fit, but you can definitely start and do a lot with the native tools, and it takes a long time to outgrow them, and especially to outgrow them in general. So maybe one thing could be done by another tool, but in general, you can do a lot of things with the tools that are there, and I think they are enough for almost any case. I hope that answers your questions. If not, just send me a follow-up. If you have a special tool in mind or a special use case in mind where we can dive deep. Also, very welcome to send other questions in the chat, and we can look at these. Obviously, as I said, my favorite tool for infrastructure automation is CDK, and then using CDK to deliver or deploy all the other tools. And something you really can look into is step function, especially with the extension of step functions, SDK calls. You can call every AWS API natively in step functions, so you don't need to write any Lambda functions or other code to call these APIs. It's just step functions natively integrated. You never need to care about updating runtimes, updating dependencies, patching anything. It's just there. Yeah, and there's a follow-up about how long would it take to get really, to know how CloudFormation works. I think there's two things. So if you really look into existing templates, use these templates within, I think, 3 to 6 months, you can do enough in CloudFormation to really use it. To know everything, I think it takes forever. I'm using CloudFormation for 10 years now, and I still think there are things that I haven't seen yet, and I still didn't try out, and that would be new for me. So you're never done learning CloudFormation, but I think if you really use it in a real project, 3 to 6 months should be enough to deploy the things you need to know. So we have another thing. What's your take on EventBridge as an enterprise service bus? First of all, yes, I really like it. So EventBridge as your central event system is a really cool thing. And also, thanks for mentioning it, it's another great tool to trigger all your automations. So either being in an infrastructure service bus and also being the service bus you will be using for your application. So you can do both on EventBridge. So AWS is sending a lot of events for all the things you're doing, like creating new accounts, doing deployments, rolling back deployments, having alarms. All these things happen also as events in EventBridge, and you can trigger all your automation using EventBridge. But you can also do cross connects with other vendors, like getting GitHub events or whatever on EventBridge, and also sending your own messages to EventBridge in your business applications, like account created, a user account created, or transaction started, or order received, order sent, all these things. And it's a really cool thing because it's scalable. You have a lot of tooling, and it's serverless. You don't need to manage it, because especially for an enterprise service bus, I think it's very, very important that it works all the time, that there is no downtime. So you definitely want to have a managed solution for this. And EventBridge is a really cool solution. One thing, if you need publish subscribe mechanisms. For one-to-one messaging that needs to be ordered or not ordered, but if it's one-to-one messaging, I would prefer SQS as a queuing system, because that's what queues are for. So there's a difference between a queuing system and a pub/sub system. And EventBridge is publish subscribe. If you don't listen to it, it's gone. If you need to make sure that every message is processed by somebody, and you need, for example, ordering, then you need to look into SQS, but then you know who's listening to it. And that's where EventBridge pipes and other messaging tooling like SQS or Kinesis or Kafka, managed Kafka, or your own Kafka come into play. That might be an option if you have these requirements. But I think for a lot of things, EventBridge solves the things. So another question, hi Andreas, which IIC tool works best for those not familiar with programming languages? That's a good question. So I think if you're not familiar with any programming language and the concepts of object-oriented programming or something like that, a configuration style IIC tool is the way to go, and that would mean CloudFormation or Terraform. And then it's a thing of if you prefer YAML, JSON, or Terraform has its own language, HCL, which is also a configuration style language. So these are the obvious choices if you don't know any programming languages. On the other hand, going into the future, you will not be able to do meaningful things in the cloud without programming anything. So there will be a point in time where you need to program something. So maybe the way I think about it is learn the fundamentals of a programming language, and then you can also choose one of the ISC tools that need a programming language. But I totally see that CDK, for example, has a steep learning curve because you need to know infrastructure as code and programming and a lot of other concepts. So CloudFormation or HashiCorp as Terraform would be the way to go then. And this is more a religion or something than a real one is better than the other. So I think, yeah, one of these, but I would recommend looking into programming languages, even in parallel, starting with CloudFormation, looking at TypeScript or Python as a programming language, and then join it together and migrate to CDK. So, any more questions about cloud automation and the AWS tools for this? As we said, EventBridge is also very, very cool at sending events about things that happen in AWS. So whenever you create an AWS account, you get a default event bus in EventBridge. And on this event bus, a lot of things are happening. Basically, all the actions you're doing, all the resource changes that are happening are sent as messages or events on this event bus. And you can then trigger Lambda functions or different automations, step functions that then do SDK integrations to react on it. So one example I'm using with my account and also several customer accounts is whenever I create a new account using Control Tower, I react to this event like, oh yeah, this account is now provisioned because that takes some time. And whenever it's really done and it can be used meaningful, I'm listening to this event and then starting a step function that's then starting like, yeah, add this account to some stack sense, create identity center configurations so people can log in. And all these things happen after the account is really there. And this is triggered by this EventBridge event. So about the new tools announced at reInvent. So for Amplify, I'm not sure which part because Amplify itself is pretty long-standing, but there's always something new coming up with Amplify. We can talk about Amplify in a second. About Code Catalyst, to recap for others or for everybody who's not familiar with this release. So Code Catalyst is AWS's new code solution to store your code repositories, to track your issues of your code, to store workflows, to run workflows that deploy stuff. So basically, it's their version of GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, whatever. And I think they did a pretty good job with it. It has a different target audience in some point, or it doesn't cater to the same target audience. It has some limitations. So it's not meant for open source software or things like that. It's really meant for your business software that you want to deploy in your enterprise or your company. And I think the biggest benefit of Code Catalyst is the native IAM integration. So you have an integration with your AWS accounts, and the important thing, accounts. So it's not bound to one account. You can deploy to multiple accounts, and you don't need to care about how you log into AWS accounts, which is always a thing. Do I provide static credentials or using this GitHub OIDC, or how do I allow my code deployment, my CI/CD solution, access to my AWS accounts? And this is a solved problem with Code Catalyst because it's both coming from AWS. And all the other things, it's a pretty cool tool. It's in beta, so there are things that will change, and I hope there are things that will change. But I think it's a good start at the current point, and I'm really looking forward where this is going. And about Amplify, so the whole Amplify ecosystem is a cool thing to start your cloud journey if you're writing modern applications like containers, serverless, and so on. The thing is, with real-world applications, you reach a point where you outgrow Amplify, and then it might be painful to migrate to a full-blown CloudFormation, CDK, Terraform, whatever solution that's not using all the magic things that happen in Amplify. So currently, the Amplify CLI and auto creation for you is something I'm very, very cautious about. I really love the Amplify hosting because this is something you can really use standalone to host your Next.js, Angular, whatever application. Say, yeah, just run this static website or run this server-side rendering website for me. I don't need any fancy things around it. Just do it for me. So this is a done thing. Using the whole Amplify Studio and all generate stuff for me, you can outgrow it and then it can become painful. So if I were to restart my cloud automation journey, why would you start? It's a tough question because so one thing is always experience and things you believe are right, and some things are obviously right, and some things I have done this way, I don't want to do it any other way. So I think I will still use CloudFormation. If I would restart now, I think I would start directly with CDK and not with CloudFormation, which is basically what I did with non-AWS resources right now. I was like, oh yeah, I need to provision things in another solution. I will use Terraform for this, but I will not look into Terraform. So now I'm deploying some things to other solutions. In this case, it's PagerDuty. So I'm deploying resources there using CDK Terraform, because then I know how CDK works, how the concepts work, and I just don't care that it's creating Terraform for me. So that's, I think, one thing that I would do right now if I would start now, using this abstracted level from the start. But on the other hand, I'm always happy that I know what's happening under the hood. So knowing the CloudFormation engine helps to understanding what's going on. Cloud automation, another thing that I'm trying every time I start with a new client is try to do automation from the beginning and only do automation, because it's so hard to switch from I did some things manually back to I automate everything, because there will always be some leftovers that now I don't have time for it, I don't want to do it, I cannot move it because it has some ugly state. And so things that start manually will continue to be manual, and it's hard to get rid of them, and you have all the downsides of not automating them. So whenever you start a new project, automate it from the start. It's like this discussion for software, when to start CI/CD. Yeah, let's first finish the project, get it up and running, and then we do the pipelines. I think that doesn't make any sense, because given the lifetime of the project, the majority of your deployments will be during development, because you deploy all the time to make it work. The moment it works, you just let it sit there. So the majority of the deployments will be during the development phase. If you don't automate them, but automate later, you miss a lot of opportunity to save time. So another question, and two ends of the spectrum. Yeah, so that's exactly the thing. So Amplify would being this heavily abstracted magic that's happening. And the other thing is, yeah, you need to learn things. I think from an automation perspective, it's hard. The middle ground would be clicking around and creating things. But that will bite you the moment you want to do something meaningful with it. On the other hand, I think 3 to 6 months is not that long of a time to learn a new tool and to get started. So I would even say this is the middle ground. Because yeah, to learn something meaningful, I think that's a reasonable time frame. There are solutions that take you way longer. So try to, okay, maybe I it's because I don't like Kubernetes. But yeah, try to spin up a Kubernetes cluster. I think it's not something you do in 3 months. So there is always something more complicated than this. And to know all the details, it takes way longer also for serverless or for step functions or whatever, to know all the details. But then you can grow with your automation. So if you start with the automation, yeah, this is how I can create a bucket, and you know what a bucket is. And some month later, oh yeah, now I can create this step functions and calling Lambda functions and waiting for events. And in the meantime, you learn how to do this. So you can accompany the knowledge about the tooling and the knowledge about the infrastructure that you're provisioning with the tooling in one go. Because if you start with automation, maybe you don't know everything about AWS. On the other hand, so you need to learn both, and then it's a journey that's just flowing with each other. So. And as I said, it's to really do bigger things with it. So you can start using CloudFormation or Terraform, and within a week you can deploy infrastructures. It's not that it takes you 3 months to do a Hello World application. So you can get to your infrastructure within a week or two. But it's not that what are conditions, how do parameters work, how should I do it? Because the thing that it works doesn't mean that it's being used in the right way, but it still works. So you can start very, very fast with it, but then you need to improve it, alongside your learning curve. So some other questions? Yeah, hi. Welcome to the show. Any questions about cloud automation? So we tackled infrastructure as code tools, the native automation tools in AWS, and also about the journey. I think Code Catalyst could be a really cool thing, because the native tools with code pipeline, code build, code commit, they are really cool, but they have a learning curve that might prevent you from using them. And with Code Catalyst, it might be easier to get started and to get to a success and really see, this is working, this is how I expect things to work, because this is how others work. And so setting up a code pipeline is not something you just do on your first day. Setting up a workflow in Code Catalyst or GitHub is something you can learn on your first day. Even if it's copy-paste, but you can't copy-paste code pipeline. So that's not something you just do. So more questions about automation? So another thing I tackled earlier, just in a sentence, like with Codecast, you can do this cross-account or multiple accounts. I think that's also a very, very important thing for your automation journey, because on one hand, you want to have multiple accounts, especially when you automate, because then you can reduce so-called blast radius, so the things that can go wrong if something goes wrong, and you can limit things to influence each other. On the other hand, if you have multi-accounts, you definitely need automation, because you want to move things from one account to another without clicking everything again, just run the automation again. And you need to create a lot more configuration with multi-account, like resource policies and cross-account permissions. And this is something you really want to automate. Also to have it on both sides in the same way, like this is my code and please deploy it to both accounts, and so it works again, and not I need to log in into this account, click around, do this, then log in into another account, click around. And so I think you should do multiple accounts, but if you do multiple accounts, you should do automation, because otherwise it is not really manageable. So any other questions? Oh, there's something coming up. So when you start with limited resource, how would you approach these deployments? So it depends on what deployment. So I think you don't necessarily need to start with automating all the account creation process and all the deployment of all the compliance and governance stuff. That's maybe not your first thing. If you're a startup, depends on your vertical. If you're in the financial sector, yeah, this is a very important thing. If not, maybe if you're not creating 100 accounts in your first month, you don't need a fully automated setup to do this. On the other hand, for your application itself, I think you really should start with CI/CD. So create a new repository, create a pipeline for it that's deploying this, whatever tooling you're using. Let's say you're using CloudFormation. Start with the pipeline that's deploying this CloudFormation template, which is empty, which has empty doesn't work with CloudFormation. It has one single resource in it, a white resource or whatever, and just deploys an empty stack in CloudFormation. Then you have a pipeline, you have a new repository, and then you can start from there. Because from then on, you don't need to care about what did I do? What do I need to automate later on? Because you need to write everything down you did manually to put it in automation later. If you start with automation, it just grows with your application. So you will never care about your pipeline anymore, because you will just improve your pipeline from time to time. But it's not this big thing of I need to write a pipeline, and it will be so complicated because you're doing so much things. If you start with an empty pipeline, it's, oh yeah, I'm doing one new thing, add it to the pipeline. So the little diffs are way smaller if you start with a pipeline. So even as a startup, I think if you're doing a startup, which means you're doing this commercially, not as a hobby project. So you want to do this for a living, you want to earn money with it or get paid for it or whatever. There is some runway that it's not like we need to be done by tomorrow. It's like you have several days or weeks to build something. So if you spend a day on automation to start it, that's totally fine, because you will save it in the long run, and you want to have a long run. And you, especially as a startup, you want to have some point where you really scale. And that's definitely not the point where you want to have to, oh, now I need to automate and I need to do it by tomorrow because we're going to scale. So I think you really should start with the tooling, and then it depends what type of people you have. I think if you're a startup and you're for a tech startup and you're building your own software, you have people that are able to write a programming language. So start with automation in a programming language. If you're running standard software and you have ops people doing this, start with something like Terraform, CloudFormation to do this, but start with automation, definitely. So, any other questions? Otherwise, I think, oh yeah, there's a question. What are some low-hanging fruits to automate compliance-related stuff? Yeah, that's a good thing. So first of all, use the AWS services that automate some stuff for you, like the security hub, the guard duty, that's automatically looking at flow logs, at CloudTrail logs to see if things are happening in your network, in your account. And the next thing I would automate is creating AWS accounts or all this identity center stuff. So you can make sure that your user access is in a defined state and it's easy to know who has access to what, because managing groups and permission sets in AWS can be a little bit complicated, or at least it's not obvious what's happening. And the regulator wants to know what's happening. So if you can show everything that's configured is coming from this automation, and this is what we have, this is the users that have access to these accounts, this is one of the big benefits for compliance. Or having compliance checks. So everything we deploy is done using an automation. This automation is doing static security analysis so we can make sure that everything is encrypted. That's a very important compliance related thing. Yeah, we click around things and maybe we forget to check the encrypted checkbox. Is not a good thing for an auditor to hear. But if it's like, yeah, we're only doing automation and we don't deploy, or the automation doesn't deploy if it's not encrypted, that's a cool thing. So I think that's definitely encryption, configuration, and user management are the first things I would tackle. So yeah, I think this has been great for a first try of these office hours. I'm definitely trying to, or planning to do this more often. So send me more questions via DMs or some messages on any social media platform, for example, on Twitter, as long as it exists, or LinkedIn. And then we will see, or write in the comments on this video, and I will try to incorporate it in the next installment of this office hours. And I'm really happy that somebody showed up, and yeah, happy to do this again. You can find me as written on the screen as HögerTN on Twitter and LinkedIn, or just look for my name. It's not that common, so you will find me. Thanks for joining me, and see you next time for the Cloud Automation Office Hours. Bye-bye.